It's my pleasure to have Adam Fogelson on stage with me, not only because it's a chance for us to talk about the future of filmed entertainment, but also because he and I go way back at a little radio station called KZSU, where I was a terrible, terrible sports analyst, but somehow fumbled my way into being able to becoming a pretty good DJ. So anyway, welcome, Adam, and thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure. It's good to see you again.
All right. So first, I just wanted to talk to you, just to set the stage, about your career and how you got started. When did you know you wanted to work in entertainment?
I wasn't fully committed to it until the end of college. I had thought while we were together at Stanford, I got to do play-by-play for all Stanford sports for the last 2.5 years. And I thought that was what I wanted to do. I had grown up in the movie business. My father ran marketing for half the studios in Hollywood. My uncle was the chair of 2 studios at different points. But I had thought I was going to go into sports broadcasting until New Year's Day of my senior year of college. On New Year's Day of my senior year of college, I was watching the pregame show for the Sugar Bowl, and I saw Al Michaels doing the introduction of what was going to be happening, and I had a flash that if I reached the absolute pinnacle of the career I wanted to go into, I would not be home with my family on New Year's Day. I would in fact be on the floor of the Superdome. And then I went, and as much fun as it is at 21 to be going from Hilton to Hilton playing cards with the basketball team, that's not how I see my life at 30 or 40 or 50. And that, I don't want to say it spiraled, but that led me to a very clear recognition that the best outcome in the career I thought I wanted to go into was actually not what I wanted for my life. And called my dad and said, we'd always talked about a company, and we started a company together. So I definitely was aware from a very young age of what I loved about the movie business. My parents, we moved out in 1970 from New York. My father had just been named head of marketing, and the studios were moving their corporate offices from New York to LA. And my parents' biggest priority was to find a house as far from the studios as possible, where he could still get to work every day, but I would not be going to school with anyone who had a parent that worked in the entertainment business. And nothing will give you faster insight as a young person into the power of Hollywood than being surrounded by people who are not in Hollywood. Teachers, kids, the parents of kids, everyone wanted to know, what was my dad working on? Who had I met? Where was I going? And the power that content had then, and still to a large extent has now, I was crystal clear on. So I was always interested, but I realized that it was something I wanted to do as a career that day in my senior year of college.
So what that tells me is you're not a big baseball fan.
I'm a big sports fan. I'm not a big professional sports fan. I'm a very big sports fan, but I also am a fan of being at home with my family as often as I can.
No, understood. It's funny because as a young person, and I say young, 7, 8, 9 years old, and I'm growing up in New York City and watching Ralph Kiner and Phil Rizzuto announce baseball games, I thought, man, that would be amazing. But of course, the baseball season ends in October, or at least it used to. Now sometimes it goes to November.
There you go.
But there was never this concept for me when I thought about announcing sports where I would be away from home, because I was so focused on one sport that it never occurred to me that, as you say, reaching the pinnacle means Christmases, New Year's, 4th of July, like all of those things you're going to be occupied.
One of the things when I talk to people about career advice, whether it's the entertainment business or otherwise, but one of the things I obviously impacted by that moment, which is still a very clear moment in my mind, but I always encourage people not only to think about what's the worst that could happen if you follow a particular path, but to really spend some time, give yourself credit and assume it's the best that could happen. What's the best that could happen? Because there is virtually no career I'm aware of where even the highest level of success doesn't come with trade-offs and frustrations and challenges. And you better know that the thing you're aiming for, if you are good enough or lucky enough to reach that, you'd better know that that's something you actually want.
Okay, so now you pivot and you decide, okay, all about the entertainment business. Now you have family members already in the business, and you have an opportunity to really learn by doing in a way that a lot of other people would not have had early in their career. What did you learn? First of all, what were you doing? And then what did you learn?
Well, it started in those years preceding me being in college. I had a chance to, I had my feet in Warren Beatty's swimming pool while my father and Warren Beatty talked about the marketing campaign for shampoo. My father ran Ray Stark's production company for a number of years. Ray Stark and John Huston came over for dinner to talk about making the soccer movie, the name of which, I'm so old now I can't get names out, but the name of which I'm going to forget. So I got a chance to learn an awful lot long before my dad and I were working together. My father became, and I was his sidekick, a marketing consultant for a couple of the big independent production companies that sprouted up in Hollywood right around the time I had graduated. Carolco was probably the most well-known, and they were financing their own films, but they were being marketed and distributed by Columbia Pictures at the time, and Carolco knew they needed someone to make sure they weren't getting fleeced, and they hired my dad, and I got to sort of be with him. It was two of us and an assistant. So I started as a marketing and distribution consultant. We did that together for 7 years. It was glorious, genuinely. We had an absolute blast together. But it became very apparent that I would never get much credit or blame for anything as long as I was under the very large shadow that he was casting. I decided I wanted to write. I was very frustrated by the fact that it seemed to me at the time that marketing, whether you were a consultant or working at a studio, marketing was the ass end of the horse. A bunch of people who were considered much more important and got paid a lot more money decided what content to make. And then at a certain point, when it suited them, they would throw it over the fence or then haul it to another building or walk down the hall and say, okay, sell it. Right. And that never made sense to me. Now, because my father was in marketing, I'm sure that I was genetically predisposed to feel this way. But it did not make sense to me that there's virtually, now, motion pictures have been, are, and always will be an art form. That is absolutely true. They are also a mass market consumer product. There's no other mass market consumer product I'm aware of in the world where the marketing possibility, once the product is created, isn't factored into the decision about whether or not to make the product. If someone decides they want to make broccoli-flavored toothpaste and they want it to be red when it comes out of the tube, a bunch of questions get asked long before you actually make 20 million tubes of red-colored broccoli-flavored toothpaste. Like, why would anyone want broccoli-flavored toothpaste? And what is the advantage of making it absolutely the color no one would think toothpaste that's flavored like broccoli should be? In the movie business, you mostly have to create the product, spend all the money creating it and marketing it, and then over the course of 24 hours, the world will tell you whether they want it or not. But there were basic, simple things I thought someone should be asking that they weren't. So because I was an emotionally spoiled child, I thought, I'll just go write my own stuff. I learned that I was much more enamored with the life of a writer than actually writing. And that the same people I was frustrated with now were going to determine whether I ever got paid for the work I was doing. And came back and started down a marketing path that ultimately led me to have the opportunity to run now 3 studios and apply all of the learnings and both the successes and the failures and try to figure out how to make a studio work that combines the reality that it is a mass market consumer product spending hundreds of millions of almost exclusively public money dollars making this movie, and if you don't earn a proper return on invested risk capital, you're not going to have the chance to keep doing it. How do you marry that challenge with the fact that motion pictures are an art form and artists need to be given the ability to create the content? And that challenge has been what's motivated me in one way or another through my entire career.
Oh my gosh, so you brought up so many different things, and I want to come back to, don't be sorry, this is awesome. So I do want to come back to this question about solving that problem in the current environment. But first, what you said about the idea of marketing and having some insights and a strategy before you go ahead and make the thing. We've reached a point now, thanks to all of this digitally transacted entertainment, where we can know a lot more about consumer preferences relative to either genres or delivery or timing or what have you. Do you feel like you have what you need to know to be able to make some of those decisions?
I have a fair bit, not just me, people in my position, we have a fair bit of information. So yes, but there are so many other factors that go into deciding what content gets made and who gets to make it and how much money they're given to make it. And the reality is, and we definitely do not have enough time to go into this in any great detail unless you want to spend the next 25 minutes talking about it. But there's a real challenge in terms of alignment of interests in this business. If you're running a studio and one of the most powerful agents in town calls you and says, I need you to do this. Whether you say yes or no comes with consequences. Now, they know they can't do that every day of the week. Right. But if they say, this is something I need you to do, and if you want to have a producing career when you get fired, and eventually you will, you probably don't want to say no. How do you handle that moment? That is one of 50 things that impacted when I knew I had about 72 hours between finding out I would be running Universal and being announced as the chair. And I spent all 72 of those hours really deeply reflecting on what I wanted. I never thought I would have that opportunity because for the reasons I described previously, as the flag bearer for the ass end of the horse, you don't traditionally end up in the chair job. Right. I didn't know whether it would ever happen again. I took over at a time where Universal was in the midst of the worst run in its 100-year history. What did I want to do with this opportunity? That may be the only opportunity I ever had. So I came up with a very clear set of criteria for how I was going to behave in that job, and I wanted to hold myself accountable for it. And I used the first day in the job, sitting on a stage like this one, in front of a room about this big, which was pretty much the upper half of the Los Angeles part of Universal. And I said out loud, here's how I'm going to make decisions about what we're doing. And you should judge me on this, and every agent and every manager in town is going to judge me on this, and let's see what happens. So I do have plenty of information. Look, some of the information is because we are able to get a real sense of what consumers, individuals and blocks of consumers, what are they wanting to pay for, what are they wanting to watch for free or for a subscription they've already paid, what are they not interested in at all. And some of those things definitely evolve over time. One of the comforting things is human behavior that was actually relatively consistent throughout history about what kinds of stories people like to be told, how they like them to be told, what happens when you break the rules of how certain stories get told, what happens when you did a movie at Universal called The Breakup. Vince Vaughn came and said, I want to make an anti-romantic comedy. It's called The Breakup. I am willing to take 40% of my current fee to make an anti-romantic comedy. Do not ask me to screw with this, because I know what's going to happen. And by the way, we all know what was going to happen. At the end of The Breakup, for anyone who's seen it, at the end of The Breakup, the audience got pissed off. Right. What do you mean you're not getting back together? And someone said, well, can we go back and reshoot? And I said, no. The reason he took this money is because he was going to make the movie where they don't get back together. We had a movie, I wasn't chair of the studio, I had to market a great movie, Friday Night Lights. You make a movie where the team you're rooting for is stopped on the 1-yard line before the end of it. By the way, as long as you make it for the right price and you understand that people are going to have a reaction, that's fine. But consumer behavior is not as unpredictable in the macro sense as people sometimes like to claim it is.
Although I will say that there was a precedent for that. Bad News Bears.
Yeah. Friday Night Lights was the dark version of Bad
The original Bad News Bears has its darker elements, but yes.
If you can mess with people's expectations, you just have to do it consciously. So all that having been said, I have in the 2 prior jobs and the slate that I have now put in place at Lionsgate, which we basically just debuted at CinemaCon 2 days ago in Las Vegas.
Congratulations.
It was good. Now they have to work. Or I'll be back here as an 3-time unemployed student.
Well, you know what? But I'll welcome you back, though. If that happens, you can come right back here and tell everybody how it worked out.
I'll be happy to do that.
There we go. So again, so many different things that we could talk about, but this thing that you brought up earlier about figuring out the art and the science of it, and how do we make this business work? So much has changed in the industry over the last year and a half, 2 years, and I recognize there's a certain amount of angst and concern. I personally am very optimistic, but I do recognize that there are certain things, certain elements in the industry that are points of friction. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts about things that you'd like to see, whether that's with respect to how we think about greenlighting, or if it's stuff with exhibition, if it's timing, if it's whatever. Do you have any thoughts about, what would get us to a better place?
Well, speaking from my position in my company, I actually love where we're at. We have some very unique advantages at Lionsgate that just don't and can't exist at the legacy studios. So I love the position we find ourselves in. The overhead to run the Lionsgate Motion Picture Group is about $900 million a year less than the overhead to run Universal Pictures. And at the end of the day, when we have Twilight or we have Hunger Games or we have John Wick, the performance doesn't change. We have also, partially because it's one of the things I have been committed to doing over the last 10 years, and partially because we're so much smaller, we're able to spend considerably less in marketing to have the same impact. Now that obviously doesn't mean they all work, they don't. It just means that on John Wick 4, we can spend tens and tens and tens of millions of dollars less than a legacy studio, never have Keanu Reeves call and say, "Where's the campaign?" But the net effect of those two things is that we have a number of movies every year that will not be written about in the press as being wildly successful, but that actually generate a really significant profit. We had a lovely little movie. We have a faith-based arm to our company called the Kingdom Story Company, a partnership. And we had a movie in November called The Best Christmas Pageant Ever, based on a book. That movie, it won't be written about the way Minecraft is being talked about, which, by the way, is doing massive business today. It's not Super Mario Brothers. It grossed, $40 million at the domestic box office. The profit of that movie will cover a larger percentage of the overhead of Lionsgate than a Marvel Avengers movie would for Disney.
Right.
That gives me the flexibility to make a certain type of movie, as long as we're making it at a particular price, not just to stroke talent I want to be in business with, not just because I need to figure out, but when you think about it, I was nowhere near working at Lionsgate when the first John Wick came out, but John Wick 1 making $40 million at the box office
huge.
Would probably get thrown away if I were still running Universal, because you need multi-$100 million profit generating hits to keep the lights on. We can afford to make different kinds of movies and build and create new franchises, and a lot of what we put on stage this past week is sort of in that family. I definitely think there are changes that have to happen in the industry, the conversations. I think the experience that happens when you go to a movie theater has to improve. And there are questions. The big theme this week at CinemaCon was around windows, and I certainly understand the reason for that, and I respect it, and I don't have answers. I have thoughts. I've had thoughts for years. I thought we should have been experimenting with windowing 20 years ago, and I was very public about it, and go read about it if you care. I thought we should have been way out in front of figuring out. There are people who do not go to movie theaters and will not go to movie theaters because they're too busy, because they have a family and they can't leave on particular, and want to see the product while it is the global spectator sport everyone's talking about it. I believe there is a price point that you would not in any way inhibit someone who might go to a movie theater from going to the movie theater and still capture a certain portion of the population that would care and be willing to pay real money for it. I don't know that $19.99 a couple weeks after it's not where I would have started. But the conversations I had with exhibition this past week were, I hear you, I know you're uncomfortable, they're pushing for going back to a 45-day window before a movie can be seen at home. And Lionsgate isn't a market mover in this area, but I may be open to having that conversation. But I don't want us to ignore the fact that exclusivity does not seem to be the primary driver of consumer behavior in virtually any other business that should make sense. When I was growing up, and by quick glance, I must be older than everybody in this room. When I was growing up, at another one of those moments, I have a very clear memory of asking my father when I was 10 years old why I could not watch the Laker game on television.
Oh, dude.
And my dad said, you'll never be able to watch the Laker game on television when they're playing in Los Angeles, unless the game has sold out 2 weeks in advance. Because if you could watch it at home, who in their right mind would pay for a babysitter, pay for gas, pay for parking, pay $8 for a hot dog you could get at home for $1, pay $10 for a beer you could get at home for $1.50? Like, who would go? Now, because the sports owners are a combination of the movie studio and the exhibitor, there came a day when the money that was being offered to televise the games was too good to say no to. So they said, yes, and what do we have to do to make the experience of coming to one of these arenas exciting enough? Because let's be clear, you cannot watch a movie in a better environment than a movie theater.
That's right.
I don't care. I have an amazing, ridiculous theater at home. Like, it's awesome, and I get to watch, like, Minecraft is waiting for me at home. I can't get more than 16 people, and if they spill a Diet Coke in the room, I shoot them. But I can't. And the screen is 1/5 to 1/20 the size of a serious screen in a real movie theater. Watching a sporting event at home is the best seat in the house to watch a game.
No doubt.
Ari Emanuel's $20,000 a game seat at the Lakers, J.J. Redick, the coach, or one of the officials is standing in front of him for half the game.
Right.
When you're watching a sporting event on television, whatever the best seat in the house is at any individual moment, that is the seat you're sitting in. But the experience of going, they have really worked. Those arenas, for all sports of consequence, those arenas are entertainment destinations. You are way overpaying for the food, but they have worked really hard to make you feel okay about it. And I said to exhibitors this past week, once in a great while, and some circuits are actually good at this, so I don't mean to paint this with too broad a brush, but once in a while, I go to a movie theater, I order popcorn, and I have that moment of horror where I know I'm going to be disappointed, and then once in a while, I'm not. Because while I could absolutely buy coconut oil, I could do the things that are required to make brilliant movie theater popcorn at home, I'm not going to. And once in a while when you get it, even though I know full well that I'm paying an 8,000% markup on the cost of putting that popcorn in a bag, if I get great popcorn in a movie theater, and that's one small piece of a larger puzzle. But people are, you all could, I don't know how many of you did this morning, every one of you could make a Starbucks cup of coffee at home for $0.25. You could buy a Starbucks pod with Starbucks beans and make it for $0.25. And you're all standing in line every day and paying $5. You're going to concerts, you're going to restaurants. Now, you have to pay a delivery fee, but you don't have to pay for alcohol markup. So at the end of the day, you'd be better off from a cost standpoint most of the time. If we're just talking about exclusive, you'd be better off at home. People are going to Starbucks, people are going to restaurants, people are going to concerts, people are going to sporting events. People are going to sports bars. Sports bars is literally just paying excess for the alcohol to watch it on TV.
Right.
So clearly the experience matters, and we're not doing a good enough job. There are too many trailers before movies start. There are too many ads before movies start. The seats are not good enough. The experience is not good enough. Concessions are not special enough, and we're not doing a good enough job of making the kind of content that people want to see. All of those things have to be adjusted, but I fundamentally believe that sitting with 1, 2, 3, 4, or 500 other people to have a communal experience with the right type of movie is not going to go away as long as we are smart about how we handle our business collectively.
I love that. Now, I will point out that when it comes to sports and watching on TV, if people had us announcing the game in their homes, then it would be a wrap.
The only thing I'm sad about in not pursuing it is that the world missed out on hearing my storytelling.
Can you imagine? Right? We should announce the professional wiffle ball circuit or something. Pickleball, something. Right?
Good chance I'll be available in the next year or two, so just let me know.
Well, it's funny you say that. So what Adam just teased is that since he's been chairman, there are titles that are going to come out that are going to be released over the next year that really are the first ones that you've blessed. Are there any titles that you're really excited about?
there are good things and bad things, as I said, in every job. Here's the good thing. I'm excited about all of them because I said yes. Like every movie there's one or two holdovers, I'm not going to call them out, but for the most part, from this moment forward, everything. I did not greenlight Ballerina, which is the next big one, but we did a lot of work on it since I ended up in this job, and it's turned out great. But pretty much once you get to the fall, everything after that, I either greenlit or acquired based on the criteria that I mentioned to you before. It has not changed. Some of the metrics I use around it have changed, but the basic criteria around what I'm willing to say yes or no to remains unchanged from the first day I got to Universal, because I have found for me it works, and Universal went from the worst run in its history to the best, and they've done an amazing job of continuing a bunch of those franchises and doing other great stuff. But the fact that every one is something I believe in, and I believe in it artistically, I believe in it creatively, and I believe in it in terms of there is a way to market to the audience to get someone to show up. So I get to go in optimistic with every single one. Then there's the day where you watch the first screening, and they never turn out exactly the way you imagined. By the way, sometimes better and sometimes worse. When people ask why so many movies don't turn out well, the process of making a movie is brutal. And when I occasionally teach classes and people ask why, and I've had over the years to come up with a simple way of describing it, and the simplest way I can describe it, and most of you may already know this may be just silly and redundant, but just to say it out loud, if I gave this room a script, if this was my Greenlight committee, which is, I will tell you, not a democracy, but I definitely seek out a group of people at each company whose opinions I value, who I want to tell me whether they like it or don't. But if I happen to give a script to everyone in this room as my Greenlight committee, and you all read it, and we came back tomorrow, and I said, show of hands who wants to make this movie, and all of you threw your arm out of its socket with enthusiasm. Like, everyone read it, and everyone goes, absolutely yes. Love it. You must do it. The truth is, if we had, and we probably will in a year or two, but if we had some way to plug into each person's brain and create the movie you made in your head while you read that script last night, every single person in this room made a different movie. You all read each line of dialogue differently. If you think musically, you had a different sound in your head for what it might sound like. If you think visually, is it bright? Is it dark? Is it moody? Am I seeing it in wide shots? Am I seeing it in close-ups? You would all have made a different movie. So the director, the actors, the cinematographer, the set designer, the person, the editor, the music person, one of the most important jobs for me and for the team is how do we all make sure that we're all talking about, we still won't be perfect, but how do we make sure we're all talking about the same movie? But the first time a director sits, you hire Meryl Streep and she walks in as you're getting ready to make a movie, and I don't care how you read the line, you better adjust to how she reads the line. Now, it doesn't mean Meryl takes direction beautifully, but it just, you're not gonna make every actor read every word the way you heard it. Things that you thought were where you put a pause, where you try to make something a little lighter than it might appear on the page. Those are all a million times over the things that make making a great movie challenging. But every movie we've got, and some of it is the work that I think the team has done in answering the how to answer the mandates that I've given, and some of it is good fortune. I couldn't force Suzanne Collins to write the perfect Hunger Games story for an audience. I can tell you, for those of you who are fans, if you've already gotten the book and read it, or if you are paying attention, I can tell you that this next book, or the book that just came out a week and a half ago, is the answer to the audience's prayer. There has been a desperate desire to hear this story told, and she has paid attention to it, and everything that's happening. Now, that's on her. I just am the beneficiary of the fact that she had a great experience with us on the hardest Hunger Games movie you could ever have. The last movie was a extraordinary high-wire act to pull off. John Wick franchise, the audience, we have a very meaningful ongoing relationship with our fans on our franchises. I know what the Saw fans are talking about, and I know what they're thinking. I know what the Hunger Games fans, and I definitely know what the John Wick fans want. And so we made a bunch of announcements this week. Snarky people or people who just want to be miserable will sort of talk about it as if we're trying to wring every last bit of water out of the John Wick stone. And I understand that if you're a miserable, snarky piece of shit. What I can tell you is everything we've announced so far, I may get to a point someday where I just have to announce another one. Everything we announced this week is an answer to a very clear, loud audience ask. The audience is desperate, for those of you who are fans of John Wick. The audience has been desperate repeatedly. Tell me about John Wick before we met him in the first movie.
Right.
And there is this thing called the impossible task. He had to do this impossible task before we met. What was that?
Right.
Well, we are creating an adult animated movie that answers that question. Why are we doing it that way? We're doing it that way because my other options would be, assuming the audience really wants to hear that story. What could I do? Well, I could recast Keanu Reeves. That's a horrible idea for me today. I could de-age Keanu Reeves.
It's expensive.
It's worse than that. It just doesn't feel right. And we have plenty of examples of that. Or I can celebrate the fact that adult, and by adult I just mean not exclusively for young children, adult animation over the last decade has become a really powerful, viable storytelling tool. And when you look at any John Wick movie, if any movie feels like it took its inspiration from particularly an Eastern animation style, in color, in palette, in the way it's done, that movie has. That is just a natural extension of a franchise that people want. The Donnie Yen character in John Wick 4, the blind assassin character, we have gotten endless, please, what happens after that movie? Right. Donnie is a really talented director. We're going to shoot that movie largely in Hong Kong. A Hong Kong style action movie that follows that character is an audience ask. And the other thing I'm just excited about in general is when you look at the filmmakers who are coming to work with us, it may be the thing I'm the most proud of, because Francis Lawrence, who's done the last bunch of Hunger Games movies and has directed an extraordinary adaptation of Stephen King's first written novel, The Long Walk, now made a first look deal with the studio. Paul Feig, who just directed, he directed both Simple Favor movies, but for us, he just directed a movie based on a very sticky best-selling book called The Housemaid, with Sydney Sweeney and Amanda Seyfried. He signed a first look deal with the studio. Chad Stahelski, who built the John Wick franchise, signed a first look deal with the studio. Luca Guadagnino is coming back to do his take on American Psycho, which I think is not at all going to step on what the first movie was. And you go down the line, we're getting great people who want to come work with us, and to make movies at a price where I can justify not only the artistic aspiration, but also the business objective.
Adam, thank you so much for spending some time with us and giving us a chance to see inside the studio.
My pleasure.